Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm in the morning in the West Coast, and you might be in the afternoon or even evening if you're joining from abroad. My name's Angela Bedard, and I'm a genetic counselor at the BC Cancer Agency in British Columbia. And I work with the Hereditary Cancer program, specifically around pancreatic cancer. And we serve patients and families across the province as well as Yukon Territory. And I'm pleased to be with you today to speak about genetics and genetic testing. We're going to go through the presentation and then we'll save questions till the end. But if you have any questions, you can enter them into the chat so not to be forgotten. Just advance here to the next slide. So I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the territory of the Stolo people, and that would be the Matsque and Sumas First Nations. And you're, of course, joining from other ancestral lands and unceded territories of Indigenous people across Canada and the world. So that is a website where you can look that up if you're not aware already. So just in terms of our presentation today, we'll be mindful of confidentiality and privacy. You may have questions that are specific to yourself and your family. So just be mindful of not disclosing too much personal information. But as they said, it will be edited out of the video voice-wise. And then again, we'll hold questions till the end. And that's the Q&A or the chat I could go into. So the plan for today is we'll talk more generally about genetics and cancer to give a grounding in basic genetics, and then diving in a bit deeper into hereditary cancer and genetic testing options, and then touch base on some of the questions that were put into the registration portion. We can go into detail on those and then, of course, answer your questions who are on the call today. So just to give a grounding in genetics, in case you're not aware, or maybe high school biology's been a while ago, going from the left to the right, how do genes work? Where do they come from? Well, our body, first of all, is made up of cells. These are the building blocks of the body. So the first cell that makes a baby is the sperm and the egg that come together to make the very first cell. And that cell divides billions and trillions of times to make the human body. And these cells become specialized. So we have eye cells, skin cells, brain cells, pancreas cells. And even within those parts of the body, there's even different types of cells. Even within a single body part. Inside the cell is the messages and instructions for the body to grow and to develop. And these messages and instructions are packaged in what's called chromosomes. So you can see this kind of long strand here is the genetic material coiled up very, very tightly. And what that coil is DNA. So this is the blueprint of the human body, the blueprint of life. So not just human beings, but all living creatures and even non-living things like viruses and such that are made up of DNA or those building blocks as well, in a way. Within the DNA strand, there's specific packages of instructions called genes. So there's many genes, about 20,000 genes in the human body that give all different messages and instructions on how different parts of the body develop. And when there's a problem in a certain gene, that can cause a problem with growth or development or disease. So just kind of reiterating that in written form here, the instruction manual for the body to grow and develop. And then some genes do protect us from developing cancer. They help control how the cells divide in our body, how quickly or how slowly, and signals for that can be turned on and off. And if there's a change in a gene, it can cause it to stop working or maybe not work at full power. And when that change happens, the scientific name for that is called a mutation, or a longer word for that is pathogenic variant, meaning it can cause a risk for a disease. Genetics and cancer, going into that, cancers are caused sometimes by genetic changes we're born with or inherited from our parents, or put us at higher chance for these cancers. That's called hereditary cancer. We'll go into that. But most cancers actually just happen by chance and happen to gene changes that occur over our life. So we're not born with a problem in these certain genes, but they develop over time. And we'll go into a diagram here to illustrate that. So most cancers happen by chance. It's a pie chart here giving different percentages, and sporadic, meaning happening by chance. Most cancers are that cause. So not running in the family, not hereditary. About 70 to 75% of cancers happen that way. So it's exposures in our environment, getting older. Our DNA is affected by age and exposures over time. And sometimes problems or mutations can happen in genes that trigger a cancer to develop. And that is represented here by, imagine you have a jar and you're putting marbles into the jar and it reaches the top. That is the threshold or the level you have to reach for a cancer to develop. Well, for a sporadic cancer, it's mostly these environmental factors that build up over time, maybe a little bit of genetics in the mix, but not too much. 20 to 25% is what we call familial. So there's some families that have more cancers than average, more than we would expect. And there's a bit of a higher chance, but it's not maybe a single gene, which is hereditary, and we'll get into that. Familial is there's a combination of environmental and genetic factors. Folks grow up in the same environment, they have similar exposures, but of course they have shared genetics as well in the same family. And we can attribute about 20 to 25% of cancers to that category. Whereas hereditary cancers, which is what I specialize in, is only about 5 to 10% of the time, where there's a gene with a problem, like we just said, gene with a mutation or a problem in it that's causing a higher chance for cancer. And in this jar model, you can see, okay, this isn't a marble. Someone dropped a golf ball or a tennis ball into the jar. So you're already getting halfway, the jar is filled up. And then some additional problems in genes that happen over someone's lifetime, exposures, put it to the top. So you're already at a higher chance for developing cancer, and then just a few more maybe risk factors are needed to put someone over the top. So that's an explanation of different causes for cancer more broadly related to genetics. And like we just said, with hereditary cancer, there are 20,000 genes in the body, but we know about a number or a handful of them relatively that are very important in cancer development and can be passed on in families. Some examples of these, which some folks might have heard of, include BRCA1 and 2 or BRCA1 and 2. It's known for hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, but really pancreatic cancer is a risk factor in those genes as well. Some people might have heard of it. The actress Angelina Jolie carries one of those genes, and she got some preventive surgeries in terms of preventive breast removal or mastectomy and ovaries out. And perhaps she's getting some type of pancreatic screening. She hasn't shared that publicly, but what these genes enable us to know is if there's an increased chance for certain types of cancers, and then taking advantage of early types of screening and detection, and in some cancer types, prevention. Most of the genes that are hereditary relate to cancer in adults. Some do deal with childhood or pediatric cancers, but most of the ones that we know about are for later in life. And again, not everyone with these genes will get cancer, but we know the chance is higher, and then early screening is important. So, what is genetic testing and when is it done? Typically, it's when someone has a personal or family history of certain types of cancer. And with pancreatic cancer specifically, it's been recommended that anyone with pancreatic cancer, even if there's no family history, should be offered genetic testing, because we know that about 10% of the time we will find a gene with a problem. So that's high enough that that should be offered to everyone. Um, if there's a family history, so this is a diagram of a family tree here, where several people have maybe had cancer, that can also be the case where testing is offered, but we're here to talk about pancreatic cancer. Even a single case should be offered genetic testing. Um, In any case, it's done from a blood sample, and some labs have it set up to do a saliva sample, and they'll look at a selected number of genes depending on the province or the country that you're in. That number of genes can be different. In British Columbia, we're offering a panel that would look at 76 different genes, and it would look at genes that are associated with a variety of cancers. So when we're testing someone with pancreatic cancer, we're looking at pancreatic cancer related genes, but we also touch on genes that relate to cancer in other types, other parts of the body as well. So sometimes we can get surprises back. There's a gene problem, a positive result. We haven't found a pancreatic cancer gene, but there's a prostate cancer gene or an ovarian cancer gene. And while maybe that doesn't quite change things for the person in front of us, it can still be very helpful information for their family. We'll just go, I'm just going to grab a sip of water, and then we'll go into what are the possible results if someone were to get genetic testing and the outcomes of that. So first of all, if we look at the genes and we find a problem in the DNA or the genes, this can confirm that the cancer possibly is due to a hereditary cause, if it's in a gene that's related to that type of cancer. And there may be certain recommendations based on the gene. And in pancreatic cancer, it may even change the treatment that's offered. There might be specific types of chemotherapy that are chosen first if there is a specific gene involved. And then, like I said, it could also open up the option of genetic testing in relatives to know if they're at higher chance. Also, we could get a negative result. We don't find there's a hereditary cause. We don't know for sure the cause of the cancer history. Maybe it's sporadic, maybe it's familial. We'll use the family history to guide us for advising on that, as well as advising what screening should be done in the family based on the family history if there's no gene identified. And then the last thing that can happen is an uncertain or not clear result. We can see something in a gene, question mark there, and it's not clear from the lab and from research. Does that spot in the gene when it has that particular change actually cause a cancer risk? Or is it just maybe a normal variation? Maybe people where the ancestors are for this person, maybe in that corner of the world, they don't have enough people represented in their databases that they're checking for these results, because they are looking at large databases to see, what's been studied. And over time, they're going to be able to figure that out. If someone were getting an uncertain result, most of the time, those turn out to be normal. With more research, they figure out in 95% of the cases, it means nothing. But if it does mean something, then the lab would send us a new report in the future, and we'd be able to discuss that with the patient and their family about what that means at that point. So, what if we do find a gene problem, a mutation in the gene in the family? What does that mean for your kids, for your siblings? Basically, most of the genes, it means there's a 50-50 chance that could be passed on, or a 50-50 chance for the siblings that they have the same thing. And this is just a diagram to show that. So there's one version of the gene, say the abnormal or the one with the mutation, the big D. They could either uh, give that one to their kids or the one that's working. This is a bit of a complicated diagram. I think it's just easier to focus on the kids could either carry it or not, the siblings could carry it or not, and even parents, if they're still living, could be tested. And what if there are no, you know, siblings or kids, parents are gone? Even cousins or other relatives could have access to the testing. Their chance would be just a bit lower because they're less related. They have a more distant relation to the person, but they could access testing as well. So, why would someone want to proceed with testing? We've kind of touched on that, but we'll dive a little deeper here into some of the reasons for yes or no. So it could give more information on, well, what's the cause of the cancer here at hand? Someone might be curious about that, but it can also give them some empowerment, like, hey, there's something I can do, something I can control in this situation by getting this type of information for me and my family. Someone might be able to learn about screening or prevention or treatment options for themselves and for the family members at risk. So, even if someone's never had cancer before, but they carry this gene, there's steps they can take. Depending on the gene, that would really vary what those would be. But why do some people not do it? Maybe it's going to cause more stress or worry, and someone's just not prepared for that. Um, Maybe there's no screening in some particular genes, um, or you can get a surprise result. Or some families, maybe family members don't want to know. And even if someone's not ready to do genetic testing now, what we can do is called DNA banking. We can take a blood sample and freeze it, basically freeze the DNA, and that could be tested down the road when someone feels ready, or maybe they say, well, I want my kids to decide, when they're ready. I don't want to make that decision. And that sample could at least be available because it's always most accurate and helpful to test the person who has the cancer. So, with pancreatic cancer, if possible, we want to test the person with pancreatic cancer for the highest degree of accuracy of the testing. If that person is gone, maybe they've passed away or they just don't want it, can the siblings or can the kids be tested? Um, yes, it's technically possible. Now, will it be paid for in all provinces? No. In BC and Yukon, we do offer testing to what's called first degree relatives. So, an adult child or a sibling or a parent, the testing is available if, as the first person in the family. But in other provinces, if there's been no testing and they're the close relative, it might not be available. But we'll go into there are some private pay options that are out there if you live in a province and you want to access this testing, but it's not available. But again, if someone has pancreatic cancer, the testing should be available in most locations. Some people worry about or are concerned about genetic discrimination. How is this going to affect things like insurance, especially maybe for the kids? Someone who's already had cancer, they're going to have, a very not good chance of getting something like life insurance or disability insurance at least at a low rate if they've already had cancer. That can be a bit of a problem. But what about but if you have a policy in place already, say it's a life insurance policy from years ago, that's okay, that's protected. It's just when people apply for new insurance, they ask health questionnaires often. But what about for the next generation? Is it going to mess it up for your kids, your grandkids? No. There's a law now in Canada that makes it illegal for companies that are doing contracts to ask about genetic test results, either for themselves or for relatives. So that has been some reassurance for folks who were worried about it. In terms of, and then employers as well, there's a federal law, so federal employers, it's protected against discrimination too. Sorry, I know we said question till the end, but I just am eyeing this question. Does PanCan offer free testing? I've never heard of free testing from PanCan, so I'd have to get back to you on that. Usually it's coming from the provincial budgets. So, like whatever your provincial insurer is, OHIP, Ontario, MSP, BC, whatever your provincial insurer is, would cover the testing certainly for an individual with pancreatic cancer. And then would it cover for first degree relatives? That is something I've never heard of advocacy group covering genetic testing, but it's PanCan offers free testing of the patient. There we go, pancan.org. But yeah, again, provincial insurers as well. So I would recommend, folks speak to their oncologist or their surgeon about testing. If they have active pancreatic cancer, asking about testing ASAP, because there can be wait lists depending on where that is. And at the very least, getting the DNA banked, getting the DNA frozen and saved. Different provinces handle that differently, whether or not it has to be done through a genetics clinic or the surgeon or oncologist can order it. So here are some resources as well for private pay testing. So like those situations where you don't have pancreatic cancer yourself, but maybe your parent or your sibling did. Here are some those are private companies that will send kits to Canada. Color Genomics and Invitae, I'm not endorsing one over the other. And then the SCREEN project is a Canadian research study. I think they send their samples to Invitae on the back end. But if you want to go kind of through a Canadian source up front, this, even though it says women's research, it doesn't have to be like a woman who goes through it or necessarily a female cancer in the family. You could access testing through that. And generally the private pay options are ranging around $250 US. And some include shipping and some don't. So it ranges over $300 Canadian. But again, speak to your doctor, your healthcare provider, because it might be available in your jurisdiction. For example, BC and Yukon, it is free. Okay, and it looks like PanCan uses Perthera. I would definitely ask them what the genes are that are covered, because we want to make sure you're getting the up-to-date technology. So do check with your doctor and compare to what the donation is covering. Again, in BC, we're covering 76 genes. And I know there's labs internationally that some panels only have like 5 genes. So it's kind of balancing that out, costs and technology. So good to investigate what's available through the funder as well as through your doctor and your provincial plan. So what if there's no gene? What are the chances for pancreatic cancer in the family for relatives? So on average, and you might be aware of this already, the chance for pancreas cancer in Canada is about 1 to 2% in an individual's lifetime. If you have one close relative affected and there's no gene identified or known about, we can say that chance is about 3 to 5%, so it's slightly higher. And then if there's more family members affected, the chance goes up. So 8 to 12% with two close relatives. If there's three close relatives or three relatives, it can be as high as 30%. And if the ages are younger in the family, younger meaning 40s or 50s or 30s even, then that chance might skew a bit higher. Whereas if the ages of those affected is more like 70s or 80s, it's not going to be at the higher end. So to learn more, I thank you for sharing the website in the chat at pancan.org. That's certainly a resource that I'll check out myself. And then Craig's cause, that was great. Cindy mentioned at the beginning of the call, there is ask a doctor as well. So even if there's not, nitty gritty hereditary information on the site, I would advise you could definitely put in for the ask a doctor and they could point you in the right direction. A North American advocacy group that's dedicated to hereditary cancer is FORCE, Facing Our Risk Empowered. They have a lot of information about breast and ovarian because that's where they started, but really they've expanded out. So they're certainly another resource. And then for finding a clinic in Canada for genetics, it will be the Canadian Association of Genetic Counselors. So I'll just pause there for a moment for the websites in case anyone wants to copy those down. So next we're going to move on to questions, and these were questions that came in the chat. And I'm just going to try to move my bar on my screen so the questions aren't blocked there. These were folks who registered for the presentation today and some questions that have come up for them. So I have two immediate relatives with pancreatic cancer with the KRAS mutation. Is this significant? So KRAS is not a hereditary gene. It's one of those sporadic ones we talked about. So KRAS on its own is not a concern, but having two immediate relatives with pancreatic cancer is something that points to maybe genetic testing would be a good idea in your family, as well as the consideration of increased screening. Even if there's no gene in the family, there would be potentially options for increased pancreas screening depending where you live. Would advise a referral to a GI specialist to talk about those options for close relatives who don't have pancreas cancer. So again, KRAS not hereditary, but just the family history of two immediate relatives. Really looking into screening would be a good idea. If we have genetic studies of our affected family member, how can we use the information for early screening? So what is the early screening in BC? We based our guidelines off of some American group called NCCN, as well as some guidelines called the CAPS guidelines. And what we offer is yearly MRI of the pancreas, as well as yearly endoscopic ultrasound. Endoscopic ultrasound is where they go in through the mouth and down into the belly to take a closer look at the pancreas in another way through ultrasound. So those two in combination are what's being done now. It's important with the endoscopic ultrasound that is done, if possible, at a center that has expertise with pancreas screening in particular, because that's a very specialized and somewhat newer screen when it's done in people who haven't had pancreas cancer themselves. And related to that, again, in BC, and I know in Toronto and Montreal, there are partnerships with a study called PROCEED. It's a pancreatic cancer screening study for people who haven't had pancreas cancer but have a family history, a little bit more stronger family history, maybe the two relatives or more, or a gene in the family and pancreas cancer, they're looking to recruit. And that's, I believe, Cindy, if you want to just Google that, I think it's proceedstudy.org, PRECEDE. So if you can just Google that and put that link in the chat, that would be great. So there can be pancreas screening, but there can be other types of screening. So say there's a gene in the family, it might point to there's also higher risk for breast or ovarian or prostate cancer, and there should be earlier screening then based on those cancer risks. So it can open up the opportunity to screen for a variety of types of cancers for early detection and even prevention. So for example, ovary cancer, if there's a high risk for that, can take the ovaries out of the body to prevent that type of cancer from happening. Is there a difference between genetic testing and biomarker testing? Thank you. So for the centers that specialize in treating pancreas cancer, it's craigscause.ca, but yeah, for the study, it's proceedstudy.org. So is there a difference between genetic testing and biomarker testing? It's kind of just depends on what words people use. Like someone might use the term genetic testing and biomarker testing interchangeably. But I would say the most common use of genetic testing means like the genes you're born with. So hereditary testing, genetic testing is kind of the more common use of that term, whereas biomarker testing is usually related to genes maybe that you're not born with. It's testing genes in the tumor, in the cancer tissue, that are mutations that happen later in life, not born with. So, but though sometimes you test a tumor and you see a gene problem that you're like, BRCA1, maybe that's something the person was born with, and then they might follow up with blood testing after tumor testing. So it kind of just depends on how people are mentioning that. But if it's something you're wondering, like, hey, my doctor said I had biomarker testing, I guess that means I already had genetic testing. Not sure. You probably need to check with your doctor. And so it's very specific, very clear what's been done already and what has not. Am I at a greater risk because my, number 4, am I and my family at greater risk of pancreas cancer because my mom had it? And we touched on that percentage earlier with one affected relative. It's about a 3 to 5% chance. If there's no gene known, if there's a gene involved, that might change that chance. It might make it higher, but just the general estimate is about a 3 to 5% chance. Number 5, how do I advise my 3 children that their father died of pancreatic cancer, had a gene mutation in the ATM gene? Yes, I think that's really important to tell family members about it. Now, I don't know if this person's children are still children, like young, a child or a teenager. The conversation you would have with adult children versus young or teenage children could be quite different, because if they are in childhood or teenage years, there's really nothing that would be done for their health care at this point that's different with ATM, a single gene problem. And that's something that as they get older, maybe into the teenage years, or as they're asking questions, it could be mentioned that, yeah, dad's cancer had a part in the genes. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it's something we can check when you're older. And in most provinces that it's required to be 19 and older. Some it's 18, but they have to basically be an adult and consent for their own testing. Now, if this is adult children that we're talking about, I think it's important to let them know as well, but respect their wishes. If one of the children has said, I'm not ready to know about that right now, you might not want to give all the details up front. It might be just a little tidbit of information that, the dad's cancer had a hereditary part, and I want to share that information so it can help protect you in the future. But I want to do that when you're ready. And then also, you don't have to feel like you have all the answers and all the details, like what's the ATM gene and how does that work? Referring them to their local genetics clinic is really important. Or if maybe they just want to browse online at a reliable source, going through Craig's Cause or Facing Our Risk would be good resources to point them to. And then the number 6 question is, my mother has pancreatic cancer and rectum cancer, and I have MEN1, which is a gene, and possibly benign pancreatic tumors. Am I at special risk? Yes, with the MEN gene, this does fit the picture. That does have a higher chance for cancers of the digestive gastrointestinal tract. So the colon, pancreas, rectum are at higher chance for, first of all, benign tumors, and they can stay benign, but there's a higher chance they can turn cancerous as well. So there's very close yearly monitoring with MEN1. And I'd really advise you speak with your doctors, or referral to a genetics clinic if you haven't already, or your GI specialist, to make sure you're getting the right screening, and maybe it's an endocrinologist as well that's following you. So want to make sure you're getting the right annual screening for the different cancer risks that are associated with the gene. And that would be the same with any gene. If there's a gene found, just making sure you're staying connected to genetics or the specialists that are the most appropriate to make sure you're getting the appropriate yearly screening that's needed. Okay, so that's the end of the PowerPoint portion, and would love to open up the chat or microphone, camera, whatever you feel most comfortable with, if you have questions or comments on anything that we've touched on or other things coming to mind. So Cindy, if someone did have a question about a hereditary matter and they put into the ask a doctor, do you have hereditary specialists on the committee, or they could maybe connect to a hereditary specialist in their own center? How would that work? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, no, we don't have like a program specifically for like genetic counseling. So they would have to go through like their family doctor or their oncologist and like find genetic testing in their centers. On our website, like I mentioned, like we do have like centers that are specifically do take care of patients with pancreatic cancer, because some of the smaller rural centers in Canada just don't. You sometimes have to go to a bigger center. So we don't have that specifically. Your presentation will be online, which is going to be very helpful, because it was a wonderfully like explained presentation today. Thank you for that. Like it's something that patients and their families can understand, which is like excellent. Yeah, so that's having that access to even that this video is going to be very, very helpful. And then they can see the links and where to go.
Great. And I will add too that with COVID, that's been a game changer in the provision of medical care broadly, but as well as genetics care. And I know a lot of centers that required people to maybe travel to a larger center in person have really backed of that and are offering, like, I'm quite familiar with Zoom because I do medical appointments via Zoom. We do Zoom appointments with people. We do phone appointments. So even if you have to be referred to the larger center, not to worry, it won't necessarily mean you have to travel to the larger center.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great.
I
That's good.
see Lori had a question in the chat. Lori, would you like to ask that now?
Yeah, and I can read it out loud too. How can we get the word out to regional healthcare centers that genetic testing may help guide treatment choices? We got the testing, but the oncologist wasn't interested in the guidance. He refused to consider anything other than chemo until my husband neared the end of life. How can we move the process upstream? That's a really good question, Lori. And speaking of treatment, there's a lot of things that go into the treatment decisions. Genetic testing is one piece of the puzzle. There's imaging and other factors. So I can't speak to the specifics of the treatment for your situation, but in terms of moving upstream, that is so important. And I think we need to do a better job where we have a study we're actually are about to get ready to publish in BC, where testing was done in two realms. So it's done upfront through the oncologist, at the time they're seeing oncology versus referral to genetics. And the time to test results was so different. Sorry, I don't have the exact numbers, but it was like on the order of like 2 months different. Like and we know days and months are precious with pancreatic cancer. To wait, 2 extra months by going through genetics took longer. So it was faster through oncology. But the message in our paper that we're going to be writing is it needs to be even earlier. So exactly what you're saying. By the time someone gets to oncology, they've already seen surgery. A pathologist has already seen the results and issued it. The family doctor already knows about pancreatic cancer for the person. So there's a lot of steps before oncology and genetics where this testing can be ordered. And I think that's so critical because, like you said, it could make differences to treatment, but even sadly, people aren't getting access to testing because they've died. They've died on the wait list. They've died before they could be referred. And we saw that in the arm of those who referred to genetics, and it took longer. People died at a rate 5 times higher than those who had ordered it through the oncologist earlier, because genetic services, it's not specific to pancreas cancer, it's for all cancers, or in some provinces, it's not even specific to cancer. Some of the prairie services, that clinic sees prenatal, pediatrics, cancer, like everyone. So they're, have very long lists. And to be able to put testing in the hands of other providers and specialists at an earlier point in the journey is critical. So yeah, we're presenting on this at national meetings this fall. We're writing a publication, but if there's ways we can get this message out even earlier, it's so important.
I'm just going to comment on that. Recently we had a presentation on pancreatic cancer in clinical trials, and in the United States, they recommend starting a clinical trial on the day of diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, because they've felt that they see, people live longer and have better outcomes. So is that something that maybe we should be talking about with genetic testing too, that we do it the day of diagnosis? Like,
Yes.
as many things as we can do the day, which I know it's overwhelming, and it's probably oncologists would say, yeah, you're putting an awful lot on the patient that day, but timing is key when you have pancreatic cancer. So if that's the day that unfortunately you're getting that diagnosis, and we're getting you set up for a clinical trial, and we're getting the genetic testing, at least we can say like that's part of like day one.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's offered, or even for genetic testing, the even intermediate step with that would be DNA banking. Here's your
Yeah.
information. You don't have to decide for the test right now, but we're saving it, we're freezing it. It's done on day one. So even if there's going to be a lot of other blood work on day one.
Absolutely.
Just
Absolutely.
add it in. It's the same
Add it
needle,
in.
one more tube that goes.
Yeah, exactly. The blood text doesn't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Just one more tube.
Yeah. So at the very least, if standard of care would be DNA banking, because to get consent for a DNA banking doesn't have to be a huge conversation, like we're putting your DNA in the freezer. It's not such a big, heavy conversation as maybe sometimes genetic testing might be for some individuals. If that could become standard of care, because it might even link into clinical trials, even like some trials might want to know, is there a specific mutation? So it could open a lot of different doors. So thank you for the excellent presentation in the chat. I'm just looking, thank you. Would you be able to address the genetic connection in bile duct cancer? A family member was diagnosed with it in successful Whipple and is scheduled to see an oncologist. Her daughters are curious if they need to have genetic testing done. Markers were CDKN2A and TP53. So bile duct cancer can have a genetic link, but not necessarily at the same rate as the pancreatic, a bit lower. But I would say testing could be offered, and depending on the person's age and family history, that may factor in. Different provinces have different criteria as well. So if bile duct cancer is not covered in your province, again, even looking into those private pay testing options, just to cover all bases. I don't want to promote that as a Canadian healthcare provider. It's some kind of dual system, but some provinces have it and some don't, is the honest answer. Yes, there's a hand up from. That's incredible. I'm not familiar. I just did like a quick Google search and they have their own website, Smart Blood Analytics. I cannot, that's outside of my area of expertise, so I cannot comment on artificial intelligence and analytics for initial diagnosis of pancreas cancer. But what I can speak to is on the hereditary side is, yes, artificial intelligence is becoming a behind the scenes tool in medicine, definitely. So with DNA, remember when we had the picture of the DNA strand and the gene, it's all, and I said there's 20,000 genes. Each gene has like letter by letter. You're dealing with billions of data points, and no human brain can process that. There's huge computer processing that goes into the behind the scenes analysis, and that is only increasing. I know there's with that PROCEED study, they are using artificial intelligence to do imaging analysis. So it's not a person's only their eye looking at an MRI or a CT scan. It's big computers that are helping with the analysis. So just can only answer your question more broadly that yes, artificial intelligence is linking into medicine, and it's not the future, it's here in some ways. But in terms of that specific biomarker test that you asked about, I'm not sure.
Yes. Have any questions? Any comments?
Yeah, just in the comments about looking into testing in Texas. Yes, I think MDA is MD Anderson, and they're an excellent center, and I know they have a great genetics team there, and would definitely advise that you ask about what's available, because they're often on the cutting edge at that facility. You're in good hands.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you again, Angela. It was an excellent presentation, and I'm excited to be able to pass it on to Sarah today to edit it and get it on the website, because I know that patients and their families are going to find this very informative. It's genetic testing is so important, and in one sense, it feels like it's like at the cutting edge, but I find with medicine in general, the last few years, like things are happening rapidly, right? So it'll be interesting to see how quickly this will go from like childhood to like teenage very quickly, because we are just seem to be advancing like in with our technology so much. And like Marta discussed, using artificial intelligence and how that is just expanding so much in medicine. I think we have a good chance that things are going to happen quickly.
Yes, absolutely. I have a statistic to end on that will kind of blow your mind. It blew mine. Uh, how much medical knowledge doubles, how quickly, based on like things published and information. In 2010, it was every 10 years. And the rate that they're saying now, based on the number of publications, every 73 days.
Yeah. Wow, right?
That's
So
it.
that's why we need artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we do, because we can't keep up with this.
Store that all in
Yeah,
your
we
Yeah.
can't.
brain.
We can't store it and keep up with it fast enough. But
so
there
much
it is,
fun.
but it's coming, right? It's out there. Like the information is just getting more and more. And just recently, I got an email from the Canadian Cancer Society, who for many years have focused on, breast cancer and colon cancer and leukemias and all of that. And they've just partnered with another organization to put $45 million into what they call like, the orphan cancers. So it's like, pancreatic cancer, esophagus, stomach, right? All of these ones. And really highlighting, how these have just not had the attention
Mhm.
and certainly haven't had the success or the early diagnosis and such as, let's say, breast cancer, right? Which has come so far in a short period of time, because there was so much discussion about it, so much talk about it, and so much money put into it. So that's nice to see too, right? That big organizations are saying, yeah, no, we're going to start putting our research money into things, into the cancers that would just have not been paid enough attention to. So
Yeah. And pancreas cancer is certainly on that list. So
it
happy
is.
to hear that as well. And just really thank you all for your time and attention today. And yeah, if you want, I didn't put my email up, but if you just Google like BC Cancer Hereditary, you can get in touch with our program if we can point you
Yeah.
in the right direction. But we know folks are all over the world today and all over Canada, so I can always point you to your local resource as well.
That's great. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.